Hello. I'm GC McKay, and today we're going to be taking a look at The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. First published in 1844 to 1846, because it was a serialized publication. If you don't know what that means, it's basically because books used to be published within newspapers and things of that nature. So they'd only come out every, month or something like that, maybe once a week, depending on who it was. I know Dickens had to do it quite a lot. And yeah, it's not really surprising with The Count of Monte Cristo because it's about 1,200 pages long. It's a very, although, to be honest, I don't really think it reads like that. I was going to mention I'll talk a bit more about that at the end, because that's when I was going to do it. I'm going to break this review into kind of a couple of sections. So I'll start with the main plot, or a bit about the plot. So the story of The Count of Monte Cristo is of Edmond Dantes, who starts out as a 19-year-old bloke. His life's going pretty fucking well for him. He's got a smoking hot woman called Mercedes who's waiting for him to return home because he's been on a voyage. He's just become the captain of a ship, and his dad is waiting for him as well. His very kind of loving relationship between them. So obviously the snakes around him don't like this. There's one guy called Fernand who has the hots for Mercedes as well, and he's not happy that she's so loyal to him, and he basically starts plotting against Edmund from the off. And there's a couple of other guys who he gets involved in this, and they basically bring him down pretty quickly and have him up for treason. I think it's a Bonapartist, it was the correct term. So that's someone who was kind of a revolutionary and working against the state. And anyone in this era who was found, well, they weren't even tried for it really. They were just like, if they got accused and then there was a little bit of evidence, that was enough. And then they get thrown in prison. And so this Edmond Dantes guy thinks he's coming back to actually go into a future with this lovely woman and, do the fucking, all the normal stuff. But instead, he ends up getting thrown in prison without really any explanation. And this prison happens to be the Chateau If, something like that. And it's in a little bit like Alcatraz. It's its own island, this fortress. So he gets thrown inside this prison that's surrounded by a body of water. There's nothing else on the island. And yeah, he's kind of just left to rot inside there. There's no one's coming to help him. No one really knows. I don't think anyone knows actually where he is after a while either, even outside of the prison. That's how clandestine and corrupt the whole thing was. And he ends up spending a long time there. I'm going to try and make this as spoiler free as I can, but obviously, because I'm telling you the plot, it's going to have a few in there. But he ends up spending a fucking long time in this prison. Here he meets an old man who's been in there a long time as well. And he serves as a kind of typical archetype mentor who takes Edmund under his wing, and because he's very well educated, he teaches him multiple languages, philosophy, all these different kind of ideas and stuff like that. So they become very close, and he tells him of this island called Monte Cristo that he has hidden his treasures on, basically. But no one really believes him about this story, and you as the reader aren't really meant to completely trust it, though Edmund does. He really believes in this old man, and they basically plan to kind of escape and flee to this island so they can pick up their riches and then live like kings. But circumstances get involved. They start to try and get a way out, but without spoiling it again, it doesn't quite go to plan, but it does for Edmund, I suppose, in the end. And he does end up rich, and then his how would you say it? his urge for vengeance and revenge are just too irresistible. And now that he has ultimate power, essentially, it's kind of his journey from then on out, how he brings the people who, you know, what would it be? How he brings the people who fucked him over, I can't think of the right word, but yeah, who actually ruined his life, and then it becomes a story towards his kind of, the way he brings them down in return. As a story, this is really up there. I love this fucking story. I think it's brilliant, really. It's got psychology in it. It's got a really fast-paced narrative as well. It's like, it can be intimidating to look at books of such a vast length, but this one really doesn't read like one. And the thing I was going to mention at the end was, I don't really understand why TV series don't actually use these novels. It would make much more sense when you really think about it, because back in that time, in the mid 19th century, they didn't have fucking TV and shit like that. Writing and reading were the main forms of entertainment. So in that era, you had a lot of serialized books and different kind of interweaving narratives and blah blah blah. So to me, it would make much more sense to use those and put them in today's context. And I'm sure this will happen at some point, because for my money, not that I have any, there hasn't been a decent film made of the Count of Monte Cristo, in my opinion. There is a French TV series that I haven't been able to obtain, that I've heard good things about, but I just think with today's technology and capabilities, this book could be made into something really special. But alas, it doesn't seem to be happening. And I think the same as stuff like Great Expectations, because I think that has been done well, but it could be done better. And yeah, this story has everything really. Revenge, kind of really, really fascinating plot, because it actually does use a few things that were going on at that time. I think Napoleon, when he busted out of that island that he was, left to rot on, he ended up taking over France again. I think they called it the 100-day period, and there's little mentions of this in between it. Then there's Louis Philippe, I think his name is, the king of that time. It's a while since I read it, so forgive me if I'm fucking this up a bit, but I wanted to get this one out of the way. And yeah, overall it's just got a really fascinating narrative, and it does influence so much that we don't really realise. And probably my favourite pointers of it, this is the last spoiler I'll give, are the personas that Edmond Dantes adapts and portrays throughout the piece. So you're reading it and you kind of realise at some point that although he crowns himself the Count of Monte Cristo, as you've probably already guessed, he actually uses a number of different personas in order to manipulate and deceive other people throughout it. And it's really exciting to read, because when he actually finally reveals himself to these people, the scenes are just so intense and nail-biting and like sweat-inducing and stuff like that, because you just don't really know. You're kind of in fear of what's going to happen, but also really anticipating it with kind of awe and kind of terror. And it's fucking exciting to read. Basically, it moves at a mile a minute. I think that's probably why I mentioned it during the Breaking Bad video of last week, because the narrative structure and the kind of plot point by plot point, like there's a plot point almost on every page on this, so it's like fucking hell, this moves really quickly, especially for a novel so old. You always kind of think of the classics as ones that would be quite slow paced and overly descriptive and things like that, but this one really isn't in ways. So now I'll move on to the second section. The writing is rather poor, I would say, overall. I mean, it's still perfectly readable, and if you're a writer or say a storyteller and you know that your main weakness is your writing ability, this book will give you a lot of confidence, because storytelling always trumps writing overall. I don't care how commercial or mainstream that even sounds, because it's true. A good story will always trump the writing, but the writing can't trump a good story or a bad story, if you know what I mean. So it's easily forgivable, but at times it's very repetitive and a bit. It asks quite a lot of you, I would say, at moments, mainly because it just has unnecessary dialogue quite a bit, where they kind of just repeat themselves, saying like, "Oh, I'm going to go now. Oh, are you? Are you going to be off now? Yes, I think I'll be off. I'm not sure. Yeah, we mon sure." And stuff like that. So it gets a bit like, just fucking get on with it. But, and my other slightly dingy complaint would be the fact that it says stuff like, "Ooh, a grey cloud passed ominously in the sky," during the kind of moment where, the moment of doubt was there and stuff like that. So it's a little bit melodramatic, but you can forgive it for that, mainly because it is such an epic tale. And really, I was reluctant to mention it because maybe it's just a personal kind of subjective opinion of it, but I did find it a little bit stilted at times, and there's just moments where you're kind of like, okay, that didn't need, this chunk could have been this there. But saying that, it doesn't actually seem to hold the narrative back in any way. It just kind of grinds on you as the reader a little bit. But overall, because of the plot structure and how quickly it moves, you can easily forgive it. And I do think it is one of those things that gives you confidence, especially if you do doubt your own writing ability. Because if you do just want to concentrate on story, here's a perfect example of what you can do. And it has influenced so much. I don't know whether you've seen V for Vendetta, but I'm betting a lot of you have. It's a really obvious reference because within that film, the main character even points out the Count of Monte Cristo as his favourite film, or story, if you will. And it's obvious why, because the guy is so influenced by it. It's like, to not mention it would be almost like plagiarism, I suppose, because it's too obvious that the whole plot of V for Vendetta is almost taken, it's not completely the same, but you can definitely tell that he takes a lot of the influence from it. And I suppose the final bit of trivia for you, it was actually inspired by a story that Alexandre Dumas overheard that could have been possibly true, about a man who was about to get married to the love of his life, and someone who didn't like that, so he plotted against him. And yeah, it actually, this is on Wikipedia, so I'm not going to be quoting it just to sound smart. So if you want to read about that, yeah, head over to Wikipedia. But overall, this novel's, it's a blistering read, really. Don't worry about the length of it. It's just pure. It's a lot of fun. And I suppose the main thing I really got out of it was how the kind of symbolic usage throughout it, because really Edmond Dantès' stint in prison is like a sacrifice to his later power. And once he obtains his riches and power, and that basically turns him into an omnipotent being, because he has the power of the next 10,000, if not 100,000 people around him combined, really. That's how much he can exert his own will against his surroundings after that. And the conflicting emotions because of that, because without the sacrifice that he didn't willingly make, but that he had to make in order to obtain that power, really starts to fuck with his head, and you really feel his anguish throughout it. And some of the reviews I read in preparation to this, we're just talking about him as if he was this amazing character and that they loved him. And I was a bit confused by that, because his revenge plots are so intricate and detailed and calculated that you really do start to question his morality, I suppose, overall. And it gets to the point where, yeah, Edmund, you can say you're doing this out of Providence or for Providence's behalf, but really, it's I think you're taking the piss a little bit, because he gets dark and it gets really kind of disturbing as it goes on. And it's not just a revenge against kind of three people, it's more of a chain of vendettas that he does over time, and shows the kind of a patience that is a bit chilling, really. It's like fuck, man. And he's like, yeah, but because he does have this really detailed psychology throughout the whole thing, which is really impressive for this era as well. You're just fascinated by him, and because you're questioning his actions whilst he is also questioning himself and suffering because of them. You're just kind of like, wow, this is really impressive. And like I said, when he does actually finally confront the people who fucked him over, it's just awe-inspiring, I find. And I don't think you can achieve that. I've mentioned this before, but without the length that it is, I don't think you could actually get that kind of moments where it's just like, this is so intense, because you have such an emotional investment in the story and the character or characters that it provokes so much within you, that because it's like, what's going to happen, you can't really second guess it. Even if it was turned into a TV series, I'm sure I would have those same feelings evoked by particular scenes, because it's heart-wrenching at moments. It's like you really feel his rage and disgust and just pure bitter kind of anguish throughout it, and it's like, fuck, man, it's really impressive. But saying that, the writing is poor, so it's kind of a mixed bag in that regard, but I do thoroughly recommend it. And Edmond Dantes is probably my favourite character in literature, I would say. I can't think of anyone else who I really loved in that regard, because to me he's an anti-hero, really. The ending of the entire piece is satisfactory, if not a bit lame, I would say. I not in a really bad way, but more in a kind of like, okay, that's what he's going to do, is it? Right. So it's like, but it doesn't take away from the kind of epic journey of the whole piece. And in some ways, I suppose it's kind of melancholic, I suppose, a little bit male, I would say, in the way it ends, as if that's the kind of ideal. But in some ways it makes sense, because he kind of returns to the youth that he lost in some ways, maybe. But yeah, it's just epic. And I thoroughly recommend it, so check it out if you haven't. And if you really want to get into something that's going to take up a bit of your time and that you can really invest yourself in, the Count of Monte Cristo is a great choice to make. So yeah, check it out. Thank you very much for watching this. I don't know what I'm doing with this channel at the moment, if I'm honest, so I'm going to continue with the book reviews, but I will be mixing it up whenever I can. It depends on my time constraints, really, but yeah, it's been fun, so hopefully I'll be able to surprise you a bit in the future, but if not, I'll stick to this format. So thank you very much for watching. I've been GC McKay. You can check out all my bullshit in the links below, and I'll see you next week. Thanks. Bye. Au revoir.